edition of In Conversation, brought to you by Daily Mirror. And first of all, I want to convey my gratitude for everyone who has been in this incredible audience, sticking throughout all our episodes. And today I have with me someone very special. She has a very unique journey in teaching, and she aspires to shape the learning experience here in Sri Lanka. She is the founder and the principal of Colombo School of Arts and Sciences, Colombo 7. And it is with extreme pleasure that I have her on board with me. So, Shaleeka, Jayalath, thank you so much for joining in with me.
Thank you for having me, Hirushi.
So I heard about you, and I've been following up on all the work you've been doing, and it's really impressive. And before we dive into specific things, I want to talk about how we can incorporate online learning experience and optimize learning experience in a pandemic. And there's much of a specified theme that I would like to dive into later on. But right now, I would like to know how exactly your journey into teaching began. And usually some of the best things are not very planned. So I would like to hear your story on this.
So I completed my degree in the UK and came back to Sri Lanka a very long time ago, back in 1996. And I was, quite by accident, I was roped into teaching at one of the leading international schools in Colombo at that time. And I started teaching in January of 1997. And then after a point, I really didn't think I would stick it out. In fact, I went into the job with a lot of reservations, saying that I did not have the experience and it wasn't what I wanted to do. And on the very first day of school, my boss at the time gave me two pieces of advice, which I think have really stuck with me and shaped how I teach in class. He said two things bear in mind. He said, one, you need class control. Never let go of that. You need to be in control of the class. And secondly, he said, care for the kids. And that's the only training, if you like, that I have had for my entire teaching career. And I think that has really made a difference. So, I took that on board, and somehow it was not what I was expecting, but I did take to it like a duck to water. I stuck with it. I did have spells where, because I also did accountancy, and my master's is, for my master's I actually specialized in strategic planning and resource optimization. So, I have worked as a consultant both in Sri Lanka and in London. I worked at Ernst & Young. So I've had that balance of industry experience as well, but somehow I have always come back to teaching. And regarding Colombo School of Arts and Sciences, which is where I am, as you said, I'm the founder principal, and it was my brainchild. The concept for it was actually the result of a challenge that was thrown to me by a couple of my own students. It was outcome of a case study that we started discussing in class, and then one of them threw out the challenge to me, saying it would be wonderful if we could have, if you could design a school like this. And I said, well, that is a dream, isn't it? And I laughed it off. But then that stuck with me, and on a Sunday afternoon when I had nothing to do, I sat down and I planned out the whole concept. And then, of course, forgot all about it. But then that was, but I shared it obviously with my students as the outcome of a case study, nothing more. But then that got forwarded to various people. I think about 6 months later, shall we say, I was contacted by a tertiary institute and asked whether I would like to set up a secondary school. That's how Colombo School of Arts and Sciences came to life.
That is incredible, and especially to know the journey that's behind creating a legacy. And creating a platform for learning. So talking about CSAS, what do you consider as the important attributes that you consider that is valuable to your institution?
So when we had this idea to start Colombo School of Arts and Sciences, incidentally, we started as Colombo School of Arts, and the sciences got tagged into the name later on, because what we really wanted to create was a school that would actually place value on the humanities and the arts, because very traditionally in our part of the world, there is this approach to education that says that it's only that if you're a smart kid, an intelligent kid, then by default you choose the sciences. And it is the so-called dumb kids who would then choose the arts. And there's this traditional split into the science stream or the art stream. And what I wanted to really do is break that way of thinking, because you can have an extremely bright kid who goes into the arts, the humanities, the business stream even, and does very, very well. But because of that traditional way of thinking, you have kids who, to please their parents, their family, feel that they have to become a doctor or a lawyer. I think accountancy is way down the line, but of course, and then of course, talking of doing something like philosophy or sociology or even art is just, right at the bottom of the list. So we wanted to break that way of thinking, and we wanted the focus to be on business and arts. And therefore, when we actually started, the name of the school was Colombo School of Arts. What we tried to do was to offer a wide range of subjects in the arts, the humanities, and the business streams, and also avoid that system of having subjects in baskets, so to speak, so that a child was forced to take X number of subjects, but allowing them to go across streams and pick subjects that they were interested in, and effectively, as a result, carve out their future careers. And then, of course, as I said, the sciences got tagged along later, because we were pretty much, we got to the point where we were offering all the subjects other than the three main science subjects, biochemistry, physics. So it wasn't a great stretch from there to add on the three sciences. And then, of course, we became Colombo School of Arts and Sciences, but it's still known affectionately to our students as CSA. So that's one. So that's going back to the concept, if you like, for the school. We also started off as a senior school because we felt that is where the need really was. Most students in schools, unfortunately, I don't know if I should comment, but they tend to go to school, and straight after school at 1:30, they grab some lunch and they're off to one tuition class after another. And some of them, don't get home till about 9 o'clock in the night. There might be a few who manage to get some sports in, but to a large extent, especially in the older grades, their lives focus around. Naturally, every parent wants their child to do the best and possible academically, get good O-level, A-level results, and get into a good university. I'm a mom myself, and I agree with that. I understand that. But I disagree with children having to get those grades by going for tuition. In the long run, we're not helping any of our students by giving them tuition, holding their hands. They have to be trained to be independent learners. Otherwise, what happens is they get tuition all their lives. They cannot study on their own. They don't know how to manage on their own. They go off to university and they can't cope. They don't know how to timetable themselves. They don't know how to make notes for themselves, because everything has been done for them all through their student life until the age of 18. So they can't fit into university. Well, they do ultimately get their degree, but it is a struggle nevertheless. Some drop out. When it comes to the job market as well, I think there are repercussions there too. So what we need to do, and I can say this, having seen our alumni at CSA go out, is, they've all, almost all of them, and I am really proud of that fact, they've all been high achievers. We are an inclusive school. We do take in students with learning needs, and we give them the level of support that they need. That brings me on to several other things that we do, which is different to the traditional sort of school. We have, for one thing, we have small numbers, and something that we guarantee parents is that we will never have more than 1 to 10 in a class. A 1 to 10 teacher-student ratio. The school is also deliberately kept small, not more than 60 kids, so that we're like a little family at CSA. And it helps. It helps the kids because, it's second home to them. It's sometimes I think increasingly parents are working. Sometimes there's no time for them to spend time with their kids. There are kids who come from difficult family backgrounds where, sometimes they need a little bit more attention, and school is able to give them that. So it's if you and the whole idea is that, we try to tell them, that teach them, give them the self-esteem that they need to stand on their own feet. Even if it means, usually, so since when we first started, we took kids in from grade 9, so they were 14 years and up. Later on, as we progressed, we've now become a fully fledged secondary school, because we take kids in from grade 6 and upwards. I'm not sure whether we have plans to go down to being a primary school. That's something to think about for the future, but definitely we take kids in from grade 6 and upwards. And the idea is to drive home a no tuition policy, with the idea of making sure that kids learn to be independent learners, so that they can stand on their own 2 feet, and to support them in that. We have this sort of a family culture. We have a 1 to 10 teacher-student ratio, and when you have such small numbers, I told you we don't have more than 60 kids in the whole school. The rest are, on a waiting list. When you have that kind of small setup, we are able to then get to know each child personally. We know what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are when it comes to learning. And, if necessary, especially with kids who have special needs, we can actually tailor-make some of the teaching. Although they are in a mixed class, we can cater to those extra needs, so that our special needs kids, they've done wonderfully well. Some of them have gone on to top the country, which is hugely satisfying. And almost all of our alumni, they've gone on, they've been batch toppers, they've got first class degrees. But the best is that, they come back and they tell me about, how well they're doing, how successful they are, and how well they cope compared to their peers. And that difference is nothing else other than the fact that they've learned to be independent, and we've learned to give them that self-esteem. I'm digressing slightly here, but Hirushi, that I have spent several years working with other NGOs such as Girl Guides, and at Girl Guides, we believe a lot in sort of non-formal education as well. All of these ideas also, I think, have come into shaping how we do things at CSA. There's a lot of focus on traditional core cultural values, while giving kids that 21st century learning that they need so that they can fit into the job market at the end of the day. As I was saying to you earlier, before this interview, there are sometimes more important things in life than academic grades at the end of the day. Kids need to learn the importance of things like gratitude, honesty, integrity. That is what's going to define who they are going to be one day in society. Research has shown that a child in these formative years, the lower teenage range, when they learn to have that, when they know who they are, I think the first step is learning who they are as individuals, learning to accept themselves, when they learn what is important to them, what values they need to hold, that's the first step. From there, they gain their self-esteem and their self-confidence. Now, a child who is confident then is able to then go on and become a leader, and from there actually think about making a difference in society. So, it's with that long-term game in mind, if you like, that we try to do things at CSA, and I guess that's what makes us different.
Yes, and from I can kind of infer that we're yet to achieve a holistic approach in education in Sri Lanka. So along with that issue, what other areas do you see in the current education sector that needs much attention and improvement?
Well, I think it differs whether, depending on whether we're talking of the national schools and the national curriculum, or whether we're talking about the international schooling arena.
It's definitely two spaces. But overall, in general, it could be at a point where they overlap. I've seen so many national school kids who later on move on to international education. I've seen it go the other way around as well. But overall, what areas do you think that needs attention, that deserves attention?
I think in every, every school certainly has their pluses and minuses. And I think also if you take even the national curriculum, there's, there's a lot of negative, that we talk about when we mention the national curriculum. But even in the national curriculum, and if you take the local schools, as we call it, the local national schools or the private schools even that follow a national curriculum, there are a lot of pluses as well. Sometimes the national schools are more grounded than the international schools in the traditional values. And there's a lot to be said for that. That base foundation is actually very, very good. But unfortunately, if you take the national curriculum, especially as we progress, moving on to definitely O levels and A levels, if you take the way that the system is designed, unfortunately, the emphasis is on rote learning. So, students are the same the world over. They want to get their grades. They eventually learn, sadly, that if they want to do well in class and get their grades, then they have to sort of memorize a certain number of points. And if they can reproduce that in their term tests or exams, or they'll get their grades. And so they automatically learn to be, as I say, it becomes parrot learning, as I call it, where they just learn to just regurgitate what they have memorized. And there's increasingly, the focus is not on what we call mastery, right? So there are different learning styles. Some kids learn for mastery, to understand the subject. Some kids learn purely for performance. And unfortunately, if again, there's a lot of research out there, but if you look at if you really take high achievers, The high achievers are the ones who learn to learn for mastery. They have that sort of achievement goal, and they learn, because there are different sorts of classroom achievement goals. The ones who learn for mastery, for understanding, to really understand what's going on, they are the ones ultimately who do well, perform better, and perform better in life as well, rather than someone who's just learning to get the grades and pass. But unfortunately, the national curriculum is designed in such a way. So at some point in time, even if a kid was, however interested, let's say a child is, in learning, let's say when they are in grade 6 or grade 7, let's say they're interested in, for example, the ancient civilizations, and they want to learn about how the a different religion, say, what the Egyptians followed, or what they believed in. At some point, when they come to that middle school level, they realize, well, even if I did master, what's been happening in these ancient cultures, all of that knowledge is not going to really, I'm not going to need all of that. Eventually they realize, no, if I just learn the key points, that's good enough. And as soon as they start thinking like that, that is when you see that little switch in how they learn. They shift, the focus shifts from a mastery focus to a performance focus. And, and then you've lost that kid, because from then on, they just think, well, we can do the minimum. And then they wonder, why are my grades going down? But then that's because, but of course, if you're following the national curriculum, that is, I have to say, the only way to get good grades, I guess. But the thing is, then it catches up with you later on when you go to university, or when you go to, you go on to a job, because you are required to have those extra skills. And this, not just those specific learning skills, but also, like, let's say you wanted to understand something, then you would go out and you'd learn how to research, for example. You'd learn how to collaborate with others in a group to get the sort of information that you wanted. And all those other soft skills which come into play very much, when it comes to, say, employment, all of that is lost. And that opportunity for out of the box thinking is completely lost. I met some years ago, I was speaking with the CEO of one of, again, a well-known company in Sri Lanka that started off really small. It was actually one of these digital online companies, and it really kicked off. And he was sharing with me one of the questions that he always says that he asks candidates when they come for an interview. And he says, okay, if I asked you to make a presentation, and I suddenly brought forward the deadline, what would you do? Because I now say I want it in the next half an hour, and your presentation is not ready. What would you do about it? And he says most candidates will give the wrong answer at that point. They'll say, no, there must be a way, or we'll get an extension, or we'll ask for a different deadline, or we will say that we couldn't do it. He said, those are always answers that come to me. Whereas this is life. And, sometimes you just have to learn to wing it. And that ability, and, when he said that to me, I thought, I guess I, made the connection to the, education field as well. And, what that demonstrates is that, most students don't have that ability necessarily to think on their feet, think of a creative solution, think out of the box. And that is what we take away from them when we go into parrot learning and just say, okay, here's the information, now study. And the tuition culture doesn't help either, because kids pay to go for tuition to somebody who's then going to generate those results for them. And, so what does the poor tuition master do as well, or, tuition teacher? They just have to follow the same pattern. So it does not help. And, in the international school arena, I mean, fortunately, we follow different curriculums now. At CSA, we follow the Cambridge curriculum. And I'm extremely pleased to say that they do have a better approach. The focus is more towards understanding. Students are actually rewarded in exams for demonstrating understanding. They're not being tested on facts and how much they can remember, but they are actually given higher marks if they can actually show that, give an extra explanation, if you like, and show that they actually understand what they have learned. And so the focus is more towards mastery. So we're very blessed to have a better curriculum that we can offer students. But at the same time, it's all in how you deliver that to a student also. So, when you're teaching a particular subject, do you go across and teach a cross-curricular subject, for example? Do you allow kids that time to make the connections between subjects? I'll give you an example. So if, let's say, you're teaching something like literature, right? You must have studied, say, or read, say, a Jane Austen when you were in school, right?
I did literature. Yeah.
Okay.
We studied that.
Okay. So you must have read Pride and Prejudice or Mansfield Park, Jane Eyre. You must have done those. Now, if you take something, say, like Mansfield Park, right? And I'm just going to keep this very simple. But, if you look at the sort of choices in the book, right, that's stemming from a sociological problem, right? If you look at what society was like back in the day in the UK, the way society was structured, we talk of in Asia a caste system, which is frowned down upon by the West. But, the West also had their own form of caste system. The eldest in a family would be the one who inherited the father's property. The next son would probably get a living, had to go into the church, because then they had the opportunity to, take over the church and get that living that was assigned to that on the father's property. The next son didn't have a choice, had to join the army because he had to make his own way in life. So they had their own, in a way, similar sort of system. And, when you understand that, you sometimes then understand, why certain choices were made in those novels, but it's about allowing students to make that connect, and giving them that space to explore, to look at. And, you need to have, and, also when you teach, you have to kind of break it up, do what we call scaffolding. So you give them a little bit. You can't sort of bombard kids with that, but, you need to give them, you need to give them little bits of information, a little at a time, build on it, that sort of, and follow what we call a constructive approach to teaching. The traditional approach to teaching is where, the teacher stands in front of the classroom, delivers their lecture or whatever they're going to be talking about, maximum asks kids a couple of questions, and they're out of there. And sad to say, that approach has not changed from, over the centuries. It was something that came up so many centuries ago, and unfortunately, we still follow that in a lot of schools. Whereas with a constructive approach, the teacher is more at the back of the class, so to speak. The teacher becomes a facilitator. No longer, but it's about the teacher. And, it's actually a harder approach to take to teaching, because you've got to take a step back. You've got to, without their realizing it almost, guide the students to come up, to discuss. And you have to allow them to ask any question that they like, explore. You have to encourage them to explore. And a lot of teachers are sometimes, they know sometimes only, I mean, not to put a teacher down, but sometimes they don't like to step out of their comfort zone. They like to stick within their subject. So therefore, they are not comfortable when kids start asking these out of the box questions. So they then try to put a damper on any questions that students ask in class. But we try to break that. And it helps that we have only, smaller numbers in class, because kids also feel comfortable to ask the teacher whatever they want. And, we try to sort of drive home that thing of saying, okay, well, what do you think about it? And, getting them to almost come up with the answers and come up with the learning. And because for them, we also encourage, say, peer-to-peer learning, because when you teach, I always tell my students, I try to pair off sometimes the weaker ones with the brighter kids, for example. But there have also been times where I have asked, say, a kid from grade 10 to teach a kid in grade 11, if they have covered that covered that material already, because the best way to learn is actually to teach somebody else. So it's about changing that, the method of teaching as well. And I think in that respect, even the international schools could look at, I think, improving, because it's not just about putting a good curriculum in place. It's also about the delivery of that curriculum. It's just as important, if not more important.
Definitely. I think it's not just what you have to answer, but how's, the whys, everything has to come into the equation when
Absolutely.
it comes to learning. And yes, I think there's a much needed awakening when it comes to observational learning, practical skills, and the fundamentals of life skills and social skills. So hopefully, with the right kind of conversation, we can create stepping stones to achieve that.
I certainly hope so.
And also, I would like to get your perspective on something else. And this is about one-on-one learning experiences, especially when it comes to isolated learning. With the whole pandemic situation, we see mothers have to educate their kids sometimes. Sometimes they have a hard time being focused on the computer screen. So with the whole digitalized approach to education, what tips would you like to give? What attributes should an educator possess to give a fulfilling learning experience?
Okay, so the pandemic situation is not easy on any of us. And what we need to remember is that you cannot, going online, going digital, is not simply taking what you would do traditionally in a classroom and then putting that on Zoom. That it doesn't work that way. And because kids' their brains work very differently, not just kids, I mean, any human being, the way the brain works digitally online is very different to the way that they think and the way the brain works in the classroom. So you need to adapt to that. Also for children, and there's plenty of research out there to support what I'm saying, you need to limit the time that they spend online, because too much of time on screen, again, is not very good for the brain. And we need to remember this, I think, when we design classes for the kids, so that in total, I think one of the mistakes that sometimes is made in this situation is that what was being done early in the classroom, it's just been shifted online, literally, and the same thing just delivered online, right? So you're now facing someone from, you can still see their face, but now they're behind a screen. But it doesn't work like that. And that has to be taken into consideration. And overall, so ultimately, I mean, if you take the fact that schools go on, traditional schools, they would start at, say, about 7:30 in the morning, go on till about 1:30 in the afternoon. I mean, we're talking of, how many hours are we talking about? There might be some breaks, but we're talking of about 4 or 5 hours that they're in the classroom. Now, that might work in the classroom, but it does not work online. You can't just take them and sit them in front of a screen. For an older kid, 3 to 4 hours is the maximum. But and so therefore it needs to be broken down. It needs to be broken down in a way that the child can absorb, so that they don't get brain fatigue. All that has to be considered. You know, and they do get distracted. So, I mean, there's a lot as a teacher that you have to bear in mind when you're designing an online class for a student. That's one aspect. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but I'm going to share a story with you. So, I mean, it's not the first time, as you know, that we've had pandemics in history. And there was a similar pandemic. I mean, everyone's talking of the Spanish flu, but long before that, in the 1600s, we had the bubonic plague. And at that time, Isaac Newton had just entered Cambridge University, and he was a young undergraduate at the time, when the plague hit the UK. And again, schools, universities were asked to close down, and this young undergraduate had to return home to his family farm during the plague. And, you know, it was, funnily enough, it was at that time when he was, you know, I mean, so he didn't have anything to do, so he spent a lot of time out in nature. And that is when the proverbial apple fell on his head and he discovered gravity. I mean, I don't think it actually fell on his head, but I think it has got better in the telling over the years. But the point I'm trying to drive is that, you know, it doesn't have to be, of course, if you're an exam candidate, then, you know, you do have to spend more time, you know, with your books and with your teachers online as well, probably. But, you know, there are sometimes more important things to see and learn and do. I mean, if you take, say, for example, a tree. I mean, we tend to, as human beings, with the whole digital revolution that the digital era we are living in, our lives have become so fast-paced. We don't have time to stop and observe. We see, but we don't necessarily observe. I mean, we see a tree outside, but do we really observe it? And I'm not just talking about, say, the color of the leaves or the color of the bark of the tree. I'm talking of, say, for example, the actual roots of the tree. Do we see the struggle that a plant makes to come up and live? We don't see that. If you go down, say, Reed Avenue, you've got all those trees, you know, living this sort of, I don't know, you know, you see one tree on top of another tree type of thing, the sort of parasitic, you know, existence. I mean, do kids have time to stop and see that and then make that analogy to life, you know? So, I mean, yes, we are living in a pandemic, but what I would say, especially for the younger grades, I would say spend time as a family. Play games, observe nature, you know, do what you couldn't normally do. Make use of this time in a different sort of a way. And I think, I mean, that would be the biggest tip that I have to give. And, you know, also use the time to appreciate what you have and what others don't. You know, because how many of us find it so easy to get groceries delivered online, but there are so many who can't do that. They don't have a credit card. They don't have the finances to do that. They don't have a job because of the pandemic. So how are they getting their food? How are they getting their daily staples? I mean, it's time we started thinking along those lines as well. And those are the bigger lessons in life. And I think as an educator, if at the end of the day we haven't taught our children that in those 18 years or 13 years that they're with us in school, I mean, they leave school at 18, if we haven't taught them those lessons as well, our job is incomplete. There's a famous educationist, John Dewey, who said, education is not something along the lines, I'm paraphrasing here, but he said something along the lines of education is not preparation for life, education is life, you know, something to that effect. we really have to think of all those lessons when you talk of education.
Definitely, and I think opportunities of learning, they're not just in between pages, they're not just in notepads. It's look around you, and more than hearing, you have to listen. You have to be sound, and observe, and make your craft. So thank you so much for within a very brief period of time, you really did enlighten all of us on something that's very important. So all the very best with all that you do.
Thank you very much, Hiroshi.